Good morning. I'm Jim Ruane, the committee chair of the Legislative Committee. I'd like to call the January 26, 2022 Legislative Committee meeting of the Contractor State License Board to order. First of all, I want to thank the board members for attending today's video teleconference Legislative Committee meeting. Board members, just some homework here. To ensure we don't have any bandwidth issues, please keep your video camera off when you are not speaking. When you would like to comment at any time during the meeting, please turn on your camera or select the raise your hand icon in the WebEx application. I will call on board members to speak. When called upon, please unmute yourself, and when finished, return to mute and turn off your camera. You will also need to click on the raise your hand icon to lower your hand. Only board members who are members of the Legislative Committee may comment or participate in the meeting. Members of the public, if you joined us on WebEx and would like to make a comment at the appropriate time, either raise your hand or use the chat feature to send us a note that you would like to offer public comment. If you joined us by phone and would like to make a public comment during public comment opportunities, press *3 to raise your hand. We will use this same system throughout the meeting for public comment during each agenda item. Shelley Jones is our host and moderator today. She will be assisting us by monitoring the public teleconference line. Thank you, Shelley. I'll now call for a quorum. Mariah, can you please call roll and establish a quorum?
Jim Ruane.
Here.
Frank Altamura.
Here.
Miguel Galarza.
Here.
Steve Panelli.
Here.
Johnny Simpson.
Here.
Mary Teichert.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Mariah. Our next item is B, public comment session for items not on this agenda and future agenda item request. This item is provided for members of the public to request that an item be placed on a future committee agenda and to comment on items not on today's agenda. To allow this committee enough time to conduct its full schedule of business, I will be limiting public comment to 3 minutes apiece. Please note that state law prohibits committee members from discussing any matter brought up during the public comment. We're also not allowed to act on any item not on this agenda. If you want the committee to discuss a topic not on this agenda, you can ask us to consider placing that issue on the agenda of a future meeting. If you have an application, complaint, or disciplinary charges pending before the board, we ask that you not discuss the details of your case or pending complaint. Committee members are not permitted to receive evidence or information that is not part of the administrative record in the case. If this occurs, the moderator will gather the contact info and let the person know someone from the board will be in touch after the meeting. If your comments are related to a specific agenda item, you can make your comments now, but we ask that you wait until that item comes up for discussion. We will ask for public comment before acting on any item. Shelley, please check and see if there are any members of the public who wish to address the committee or to offer an agenda item for a future meeting.
Not for this item. I do not see any requests for comment at this time.
Thank you. Do any committee members have an item they would like to place on a future meeting agenda? All right, seeing none, we will now move to our next agenda item. C, review, discussion, and possible action to establish the legislative strategic objective target dates of the board's 2022-2024 strategic plan. The full draft of the 2022-2024 strategic plan begins on page 109 of your packet. The legislative division objectives we are reviewing and discussing today are on page 123 of the packet. We'll begin with item 3.1, which states, host an annual legislative day to build proactive relationships with lawmakers and to enhance effectiveness. Legislative days are usually commenced in late March or early April after the bill introduction deadline. The proposed target date to conduct the first CSLB legislative day is April 2023. Planning the event for next year seemed more appropriate given the COVID-19 concerns this year. Any comments from committee members on Objective 3.1? All right, seeing none. Our next item is 3.2, review policies, procedures, and current practices for compliance with the Administrative Procedures Act to ensure appropriate decision-making. This item involves a review of CSLB enforcement and licensing division operations to ensure current processes and procedures are compliant with the rulemaking requirements of the APA. Staff intends to commence the review July 2022. Any comments on the committee members, from the committee members on objective 3.2? All right, seeing none, our next item is 3.3, which states, use plain language in all legislative proposals and bill analyses for better consumer and contractor understanding. As you can see, this objective was edited to provide additional clarity. New text is noted as underlined and deleted text is shown as strikeout. Sponsored legislation was replaced with legislative proposals and bill analyses, as these are documents that are prepared by staff and presented to the board for review and consideration. Staff will continue to make a conscientious effort in all documentation and correspondence to ensure written descriptions of legislation are clear and concise. The goal is immediate and ongoing. Do we have any comments on objective 3.3? All right, seeing none, we'll get on to 3.4. Pursue legislation requiring workers' compensation insurance for all contractors to protect consumers and workers. This item will be discussed in more detail in agenda item E. The legislation is currently in a bill before the state legislature. September 2022 was chosen as the target date as it marks the end of one of the governor's bill signing periods, at which point the governor can choose to sign it or not. Any comments on 3.4? All right, we'll get on to 3.5. Identify and include fiscal impacts for the board's consideration in all legislative proposals and bill analyses. Staff will ensure all prospective fiscal impacts of legislative proposals and bill analyses are presented to the board. The goal is immediate and ongoing. Consistent with this objective, the two proposals in agenda item E each have fiscal impacts. Any comments on 3.5? Okay. And our last is 3.6, review and collaborate with local and state government to determine if CSLB's hazardous and asbestos certification remain viable and are effective in protecting consumers in declared disaster areas. It was evident during the strategic planning sessions that CSLB's hazardous substances and asbestos certification programs should receive a comprehensive review in light of the increased disaster activity in California. The status update for this item is July 2023. Any comments from committee members on objective 3.6? All right. Seeing none, committee members, do you have any final comments or suggestions? Shelley, is there any public comment?
Not seeing any at this time.
At this time, we'll entertain a motion to approve the legislation, strategic plan, objectives, and target completion dates.
So motion.
And then Mom's.
Second.
Who is the motion maker?
Miguel Galarza.
Second.
Johnny Simpson.
Any further comment from committee members? Shelley, any public comment?
None at this time.
Aya, would you please call the roll?
Jim Ruane,
Aye.
Frank Altamura,
Yes.
Miguel Galarza,
Yes.
Steve Panelli,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson,
Aye.
Mary Teichert.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Mariah. Our next item is D, review, discussion, and possible action by the committee on the appropriate specialty contractor license classification to install, modify, and repair battery energy storage systems. We are now on page 87 of your packets for this item. A, regulatory rulemaking process overview by Department of Consumer Affairs Legal Counsel. This item relates to the CSLB review of the appropriate license classification to install battery energy storage systems. Regulatory rulemaking under the Administrative Procedures Act is required to change the CSLB specialty license classifications to include battery energy storage systems. To provide us a brief overview of the regulatory rulemaking process under the Administrative Procedures Act, I will now invite Regulatory Counsel Danny Rogers to join us for her presentation. Danny?
Good morning, committee members. I am Danny Rogers, Regulatory Counsel for the Board. I'm here to provide you with an overview of the regulatory process and answer any questions you may have. Included within your meeting materials are two regulatory process timelines. One timeline is expedited at page 88 with a shortened timeline for certain steps. The other timeline is longer at page 90 and is a more conservative estimate of the time it could take to complete the regulatory process. Right now, we are in the concept phase of the regulatory process. This phase entails discussion of proposed text and reaching a consensus on proposed regulatory language. The more we can come to a consensus on proposed language, the smoother the regulatory process will be. Once the board votes on and approves proposed language, it will be board staff's job to draft regulatory documents, which include the notice and initial statement of reasons. This phase can take anywhere from 30 to 90 days, depending on how expeditiously staff can act to assemble packaged documents. Once this step is complete, the process begins with the filing of notice with the Office of Administrative Law. This commences the 45-day comment period, during which members of the public can comment on the proposed text. The board may opt to hold a public hearing on the proposal if a hearing is requested by a member of the public. The public may then make further comments at this hearing. After the hearing, if held, staff will review any public comments received, prepare proposed responses to the comments, and evaluate whether to modify any aspect of the proposed language based on the comments. If the board chooses to modify text, there will be an additional 15-day period in which the public can make comments on any modifications. Once the comment period is concluded and the board has approved responses to public comments, the rulemaking package is filed with the Office of Administrative Law. The Office of Administrative Law then has 30 working days to review and approve the regulations. Are there any questions from committee members?
Any questions for Danny? Anyone from the public, Shelley?
We do have one request from an individual identified as Cullen user number 6. I've sent a request to unmute your microphone.
Chair Wayne, this is Bernadette Del Cura with CAUSA. I apologize. I raised my hand to speak to the overall agenda item. I'm happy to speak now, or I can wait until you're done with the entire presentation.
Here, if you have any public comment, so now's a good time.
Okay, all right. So this is Bernadette Del Cura, Executive Director of the California Solar and Storage Association. CAUSA represents 720 business members. From all segments of the distributed solar and storage industry, including C46 solar contractors, as well as the manufacturers of solar and battery storage products. Our members have helped California install 1.3 million rooftop solar systems, over 70,000 batteries over the past few years tied to those solar panels, and we play a vital role in helping the state meet its ambitious climate change and clean energy goals. That's why it's so important that CSLB follow rulemaking procedures to hear from all stakeholders and consider the economic impacts of any proposed regulation that would restrict the ability of solar contractors to install energy storage systems. We're glad that the CSLB is back on a rulemaking track. We also really appreciate that the board is open to considering reasonable alternatives to the devastating and unjustified proposal to entirely prohibit solar contractors from installing batteries with their qualified workforce. As you know, solar contractors have been performing this work safely under their C46 license classification for over 40 years. Nonetheless, we understand that the board is interested in battery installations and are committed to seeing if CAUSA can reach an agreement with other stakeholders on a common sense regulation. I want to thank your staff for their work over the holidays to develop an alternative regulatory concept and for sharing that with CAUSA. We were prepared to submit comments on the staff's proposal last week, but given that IBEW and NECA have rejected that alternative, we're switching gears to respond to their proposed regulation instead. Having received it less than a week ago, we are not ready to offer a formal response today, but I will say there are a number of points that we agree with IBEW on. We're preparing modified language for an alternative that builds off of what IBEW submitted. I appreciate the chair for being willing to postpone the legislative committee's discussion on potential alternative regulations to allow the parties time to try to come to an agreement on alternative language. We're committed to working with you, and hopefully we will have agreed upon language for the committee to consider shortly. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anything else from the public, Shelley?
No other requests at this time.
Thank you. And a special thanks to Danny for your presentation. It was very helpful for all of us. Thank you very much, Danny.
You're very welcome.
Our next items are B and C, which are being covered together as follows. B, update on stakeholder meetings, and C, review, discussion, and possible action on regulatory concept presented to the committee as an alternative to the concept presented to the board at the November 29th, 2021 meeting. We're now on page 93 of your packets. For background, on July 27, 2021, the CSLB held a public meeting to review, discuss, and take action on the June 30th, 2021 Battery Energy Storage System License Classification Report issued by the University of California, Berkeley. At that meeting, the board moved and voted to rescind all prior staff determinations that stated that a C46 solar contractor license could install battery energy storage systems as incidental and supplemental work, and adopted UC Berkeley's recommendation to preclude C46 licensees from installing BESS, battery energy storage systems, in any setting. Staff was directed to develop regulatory rulemaking language for the board's consideration. At the November 29th, 2021 board meeting, CSLB staff presented for the board's consideration a draft regulatory rulemaking proposal that would codify the board's July 2021 motion by precluding C46 solar contractors from installing battery energy storage systems in any situation. The board did not approve staff regulatory rulemaking proposal. Instead, the board moved at the November 29th board meeting to refer the battery energy storage systems matter to the board's legislative committee, also to direct staff to collect additional stakeholder input and to develop alternative language that may be acceptable to both the solar and electrical stakeholders. The board also voted that if no alternative language is ready for the March 22 board meeting, that staff present the November 29th proposal, which precludes the C46 from installing batteries in all scenarios, for the board's approval. After the November 29th meeting, staff collected additional stakeholder input as directed by the board. Summaries of these efforts start on page 93 of your packet. Staff also developed alternative language as directed by the board. That alternative language can be viewed at the website link on page 93 of the packet. The staff alternative language would provide that the C46 solar contractor may install battery energy storage systems when paired with a photovoltaic system on specific residential and light commercial structures. The goal, as directed by the board, was that this alternative language may be acceptable to both the solar and electrical stakeholders. The electrical stakeholders have responded with a proposal of their own, which staff received after the materials were printed for this packet. The electrical stakeholders' proposal is viewable at the same website link included on page 93 of the packet. The electrical stakeholders' regulatory language would authorize the C46 classification to install battery energy storage systems when paired with a photovoltaic system based on specified energy thresholds. The solar stakeholders have performed a preliminary review of the electrical stakeholders' alternative regulatory proposal and are preparing comments on that proposal as well as on CSLB's staff proposal. We just heard that from the public. Consequently, there is no alternate regulatory rulemaking language agreed upon by the solar and electrical industries for the committee to consider at this time. In addition, there is an update to what is in the packet regarding staff's meeting with the Office of the State Fire Marshal, or OSFM. The packet at the top of page 94 describes a scheduled meeting between staff and the OSFM. This meeting was held on Monday, January 24th, 2022. CSLB staff shared with OSFM staff the electrical industry proposal that would authorize the C46 classification to install battery energy storage systems pursuant to energy capacity limits described in the fire code. The OSFM representatives stated that they did not have concerns referencing the fire code. They requested CSLB provide them with any agreed language between the solar and electrical industry, and at that time they will share the concept language with CalBO, the building officials, and the California Fire Chiefs Association, and report back. This agenda item is for informational only. As the board assigned the battery energy storage systems matter to this committee, this update is to inform the committee of staff efforts to implement the board's November 29th, 2021 motion. As the chair of this committee, I want to remind everyone that the board has spent considerable time and resources over the last 5 years on this matter. As such, I strongly encourage the solar and electrical industry representatives to work together in a collaborative and timely fashion to develop a regulatory proposal that can be brought back before this committee for review in February or perhaps March. When language agreeable to stakeholders is developed, I will schedule a legislative committee meeting to review, discuss, and hopefully recommend full board approval. This needs to occur as soon as possible, certainly no later than the scheduled March 30th full board meeting. No action is being requested of the committee at this time. Are there any comments from committee members? Shelley, anything from the public?
Not seeing anything at this time.
All right, thank you. We are now moving to agenda item E, update on CSLB sponsored bills or legislative proposals. We are now on page 99 of your packets. The first item is A, Senate Bill 216 Dodd Contractors, Workers' Compensation Insurance Mandatory Coverage. This is a CSLB sponsored bill that would require C8 concrete, C20 HVAC, and D49 tree service contractors have a certificate of workers' compensation insurance policy on file with the CSLB in the first year, and for all contractors after 3. Excuse me. The board has a support position on this bill. Chief, do you have any updates for us as the bill moves through the legislature?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members. Yes, there are some updates on this bill. So we had reported last year that this would become a 2-year bill, and we are pleased to report it was moved off the inactive file to the Senate floor in early January and voted over to the Assembly, which is great news. So just a couple of quick items. I'd like to make a note about the fiscal on page 100. That was what the board staff reported to the legislature last year, but we do want to update you that we might have to tweak those numbers slightly as a result of our new fees that were just put into statute. But as the packet explains, these are just projections. They're very speculative. It's difficult to predict what will happen to renewal revenue, if anything, when these requirements are put into effect, but we just want to alert you to that possibility of changing numbers. As for the bill itself, now that it is moving again, we do want to report to you that we recently discussed with Legislative Chair Jim Ruane some amendments to update the bill. So there are 3 amendments that we sent over to the Senator's office that are pending, and I just want to tell you about these. The first one is simply moving the effective dates forward a year since this bill was delayed a year. The bill was written to, as Mr. Chair explained, to require workers' compensation for certain classes immediately and then for everyone in 3 years. So this amendment would move the 2025 date to 2026 to keep that 3 years since the bill was delayed for a year. The second amendment relates to the classifications that would be required to have workers' comp in the first year. So right now, as Mr. Chair stated, it's the C8 concrete, the C20 HVAC, and the D49 tree service. We have asked that that list include the C22 asbestos abatement contractor. And that's actually simply because in order to obtain that C22, you have to have a DOS registration. And the DOS registration actually requires workers' comp. So it's really kind of just aligning existing law. The C22 already has comp, so we loop them in with that first group. And then finally, the third amendment. This relates to the joint venture license, which is kind of a unique license here at CSLB. For anybody who doesn't know, a joint venture is simply a combination of two or more individuals or entities that are actually already actively licensed in good standing. So the industry actually reached out to us and noted that many joint ventures will use the workers' comp policy of one of those underlying licensees who form the joint venture. So they were concerned that the bill as written would require the joint venture itself to get a policy as well. So the amendment would allow just the joint ventures to file an exemption on the theory that the workers' comp would be in place the 2 foundational licenses, which is what would happen. So it's really kind of just a cleanup. And if the joint venture does decide that they want to be an employer, the bill would still require them to file the certificate, but the amendment would allow them to file the exemption when the underlying licenses have comp for employees. So those were the amendments that we've asked for now that the the bill is moving. There's a couple of other changes in those amendments, but they're really just clarifying. So I'll just turn it over to Mr. Chair unless there's any questions, or I can explain any more of this. And that is the update. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mike. This item is for information only and no action is being requested of the committee. Are there any comments from the committee or questions? Steve Panelli?
One question is the insurance to file by, that would go from 2025 to 2026. Is that what you're saying, Mike?
That's the amendments. Yeah, that's correct. That is what we requested in the amendment, which we sent over to the senator's office. They're not in print, so let's make that clear. They're under consideration, and we'll let you know the status of those and when they're introduced, if they're introduced. But we're optimistic that they seem to be reasonable changes that don't change the intent of this measure too much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Shelley, anything from the public?
Not seeing anything at this time.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next item, page 101 of your packets. B, legislative proposal that would increase administrative civil penalties for licensee failure to comply with building permit requirements. This refers to a legislative proposal that increases administrative fines for a licensed contractor failing to comply with various state codes, including failing to comply with building permit requirements. The board approved staff to seek an author for this legislative proposal at the November 29, 2021 board meeting. And Chief, you have any update on this proposal?
Just that we are very pleased to announce that we were able to secure an author for the proposal. Assemblymember Quirk has agreed to introduce the measure. We're hoping that will happen very soon here in the next couple of weeks. Some of you may recall Assemblymember Quirk introduced our sponsored illegal dumping bill, which was successful last year. So we are pleased to make that announcement, and we'll certainly keep you apprised as the bill is introduced and moves through the legislature. So we just wanted to report that good news.
Thank you, Mike, and keep us posted. As you said, we're very interested in this. Any comments or questions from committee members? Shelley, anything from the public?
Not seeing anything at this time.
Thank you. And with that, we'll move to our final item F, which is adjournment. Thank you. That concludes the legislative committee meeting and all meetings for today. Is there a motion to adjourn the legislative committee meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Steve Panelli, second.
Second. Roll call is not needed. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.